Hello, I am Paula Bennett and welcome to Season 8 of my New Zealand Herald podcast, Ask Me Anything. Now, one thing I've learnt in life is it's never too late to learn something new. So on this podcast, I talk to people from all walks of life to hear about how they got to where they are, get some advice and guidance on life's biggest questions. I have known former Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson for a very long time, and I know he actually shares the interest in it's never too late to learn something new. So I jumped at the chance to have him as my first guest for this season. Grant's been pretty quiet since he walked away from politics after the 2023 election. We're not hearing him on the radio so much and pontificating about what everyone else is doing. He is now the Vice-Chancellor at the University of Otago, but he's also had his head down writing a memoir. It's a great read. I really enjoyed it. It is really well written. It's laid out. It makes sense. You can be a bit of a righty like me and still actually enjoy a good yarn that is well written, and I just galloped through it, to be really honest. The book is called Anything Could Happen. Grant Robertson, welcome in. It's so good to have you on my podcast.
Kia ora, Paula. Really nice to see you as well.
Yeah.
Resplendent in red.
I am wearing red just for you this morning. I thought bring out the red suit to just to put it out there.
I've even got a red suit, to be honest. I mean, that's great. So.
I bought it when I first left politics and it was a bit of an FU.
Excellent. I tend to find myself wearing a lot of blue at the moment. So, who knows?
There you go. And you do, isn't it funny how tribal people get over colour?
Massively. Much less so for the blokes, obviously. We don't get quite so pulled up on these things. But, yeah, absolutely. With women, I've noticed that in politics, if you deign to wear something that is the opposite of your tribe, people seem to have something to say about it. Because I often say to people, the sky was blue before the National Party took it as a colour.
I would go, Labour doesn't own red, But then it got to a stage where I didn't wear red because you couldn't be bothered talking about it all day,
Yeah, and so, exactly. And so, it ends up being self-fulfilling, doesn't it?
Yeah, and so you sort of get there. Okay, so I've already eased us in, but my quickfire questions are different for this season, so that's exciting. What's something most people don't know about you?
I am a massive sports nut. I'm not sure everybody would know that about me. And if I were to do a mastermind topic, it would be Otago rugby from 1980 to the present day. So there you go.
Is this where I confess that I literally read your book cover to cover, but did slightly fast?
Yeah. But
A slightly bit, okay.
Yeah, I've done a lot in my life, but the sports stuff I have a lot of fun with.
A lot of passion with, eh? And so what's the last TV show you binge watched?
Oh, it was a Nordic thing. You know how there's those sort of Nordic noir things where people die? It was called Nordland.
Okay.
Nordland 1999.
Do you recommend it?
No.
Okay. Right, we'll move on from
Sorry.
that. If you could time travel, would you go back in time or forward?
Back.
Or where to?
Yeah, good question. I'm a history buff, and so there are many different times in history, but I'm fascinated by 20th century history, so probably maybe the 60s, just to see what it was really like. That thing, if you were there and if you remember, then you weren't really there. Yeah. I'd like to go back and see maybe if it was all that good.
Well, when you were talking, I remember, because, I was born in 1969, and I remember saying to my mother, oh, Mum, you lived through the 60s. What was it like? And she said, I was raising children.
Exactly.
It's really
it's the same in any decade if that's what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's learn a bit more about you. Shall we start with, so we met, I was working it out in the weekend, maybe 31 years ago, and ironically, slightly through sport, wasn't it? Because one of my best friends was on the rugby team.
With me. Yeah, I think that's right, eh? I think we might have first met when I was the New Zealand student president, and I remember the Albany campus of Massey University had just opened, and I came up and our mutual friend was the president of the student association, and you were floating around as a very mature student, I think.
Yes. Very immature.
Extremely mature, that's right.
Very, very.
So yeah, that's just on 30 years ago now. So we have known each other for a long time.
What was the Labour minister that you protested against with student fees? Remind me.
That was Phil Goff.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I was laughing because my first real foray into politics and getting out there was me protesting against Lockwood Smith. So
that's right.
when you
that's right. Our one was, I think I say this in the book, I was in a seventh former, and some students from the university came to our school and told us about fees that were going to be coming in. And a group of us went on the protest, and one of the chants was a 3-word chant that ended with the words "off Goff." You can insert the first word. So yeah, I came to really like Phil over time. I'm a big fan of his, but yeah, back then perhaps not so much.
As you say, we're so mature in student politics. There is this fantastic photo that I expected to get out the whole time I was in Parliament, and to the fact when, you had to go, is there something that you have to declare? I was like, and it's a picture of me leaning against the police barricade of stopping us from getting into Aotea Square, and the T-shirt has got send a message to Lockwood Smith and the bird flipped. Yeah.
So, I've still got one of those T-shirts in a drawer somewhere. Yeah.
Wow. Well, there's a photo of me somewhere with it. So 2023 you left, right? And you refer to yourself as a recovering politician. Have you missed it at all? How you going?
No, I missed it. I missed it for a moment. It was the beginning of 24 by the time I left, and I said to Chippy that I'd stick around after the election just to help the new crew settle in, but I never felt comfortable in that last sort of few months. I wanted to move on, and look, I still think politics is so important, and I think it's important that people of any political persuasion, we have good people. But I was cooked, as the kids say.
Yeah.
I'd done 15 years, and they were pretty stressful, the last 6 particularly, and so no, I don't. I mean, I've only really just started watching the news a bit again and engaging much in the political world. I've got a busy job down here, which means that I often don't have the time anyway. But no, I know. I'm sure you felt the same way, didn't you? That when you left, you knew it was time, and you wanted to be focusing on other things.
Yeah, I was ready to go, well and truly ready to go, and it's weird, because everyone wants to talk to you about it, and you're a bit like, I just need to. I was thinking, because I'm a recovered politician now, which is quite nice, 5 years on. But
how long does it take?
3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally believe you. It's such a way of life. It consumes you, and then you kind of have to re-engage with the world and remember how to talk to people. And as you say, everyone does want to talk to you about politics, and I still care about it. It's just mentally, I wasn't in a place where I wanted to be thinking about it very much.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to talk politics later on, but let's get to know you a little more. So you grew up predominantly in Dunedin. You've gone back to your roots, as they say, and you talk about it as a kind of typical, middle-class upbringing with parents that loved you and your 2 brothers, and your parents very active in the church, and you going to church.
It was,
I don't think I knew that about you.
Yeah, actually, that might have been a better answer to your first question, but very much grew up in the church household. So both parents were both elders in the Presbyterian church, and actually their background was all in the church. That's how they met through the Presbyterian church youth movement in the 60s. And so it was that kind of upbringing. My 2 brothers and I were good boys. We went to church and we worked hard and played sport and did all those sorts of things, and Dad was an accountant, and Mum was looked after us, but then became a teacher, and it was a pretty settled upbringing. Certainly from the outside, we had our moments, and some of them eventually came to pass quite spectacularly. But as a younger kid, it was a very warm, loving, safe environment.
I wouldn't say I'm surprised, but it was that, I suppose, getting to know you, and we were in student politics and that sort of thing. And you were wonderfully devious and cunning, constantly on how to get a message across and bring people with you and, and all that sort of thing. And I was like, oh, now I'm reading about this lovely, abiding, caring little boy that just wants to please everyone, whereas you almost wanted to piss everyone off in those, not while you were in Parliament, you know what I mean?
Maybe.
But we went through that nice stage. Eh?
I think I say it in the book too, that like towards the sort of, end of primary school, heading into intermediate, my school reports used to say things like, Grant does very well in class, but he needs to learn to speak up more. And you think, yeah, that was a mistake to tell me that, wasn't it?
We haven't shut you up since.
Exactly. We have to go back to that teacher and tell them that they got that horribly wrong. Yeah, I was pretty shy, to be frank. Up until sort of puberty, I was shy, and the youngest of three brothers. I think I sort of kind of was tailing along after them a bit. I know when I say that, people who knew me back then will say, no, you weren't really shy. But I do think as I grew older, I got a lot more confident about speaking and, yeah, as you say, getting into all the political side of life a bit later on. But no, I certainly wasn't the one who put his hand up first in class back then.
But then you kind of found the debating team, you got involved in kind of, do we call them quizzes? It seemed like more than that, sorry.
I know, it sounds really nerdy, and it was.
Yeah. Like brownie box things with other members and against other schools and that. So that would have been just increasing, because you were a worried child, you describe yourself, but that would have been increasing your confidence. And, you sort of described being up on stage and giving that sort of first whatever speech it was and then winning, I'm okay with this.
Yeah, totally. And that was almost like a revelation to me that I could get up there and, I think I say it again. I made people laugh, which I liked. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And I remember my mum was by then a school teacher, and she brought her intermediate school class along to see a high school debate that I did. And she sort of told me subsequently that she looked at this guy standing up the front being really confident, and she was like, who's this guy?
Yeah.
And so I think, that really did grow over that period that I was at high school, that I did get more confident about who I was. And I guess I sort of, I was thinking about the world, and I was interested in it. And it's funny how that comes to people at different times in their lives. I think some people are confident from being a little kid, others maybe how I did it, others it comes much later in life.
Yeah.
And there's perhaps a bit of a lesson that we shouldn't expect everybody to develop all at the same pace, eh?
Yeah, and have ups and downs and moments when you are feeling more confident than not. And, that's certainly part of, your story. I mean, I was just thinking anyone under 35 that's gay is going to be going, really, why was it such a big deal when you were in the 80s and you knew quite early on that you were gay? But it was. I mean, our mutual, friend. I mean, I just remember going through the whole process of him coming out and helping him through that with his parents and everything else. And I was thinking were you worried about the church? Although your mother was quite liberal, wasn't she? So, there's a lot to unpack in there though, when you're that age.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I'm 14 in 1986, or 1985, turning into 1986, and the homosexual law reform bill's underway. And you've got politicians like Norm Jones on a platform talking about how we're all disgusting perverts. And within the church environment, there were plenty of people kind of, perhaps not as colourful a language, but certainly with that sort of set of views. So I knew I was gay, but I knew also that it probably wasn't something I should tell people. And my mum was fantastic, and supportive and wonderful. And so was my dad as time wore on too. But right then as a teenager, no. And then just all the peer pressure, and that hasn't really changed a lot. If I look at some of the young people who I talk to nowadays, there's a lot of pressure to conform. And if you're a bit different, it's hard to know where to fit in, and it's easier in the sense that there are more role models nowadays and more acceptance. But I still think it's a bit tough for people maybe in rural communities and places like that. But it was, and I really struggled with it, and I think looking back, my friends didn't really know what to say or do or think, but then neither did I really. And it all kind of unraveled spectacularly.
I feel privileged to have been able to vote in the same-sex marriage bill. That's now, of course, legislation. How significant was that for you? And by then you'd had a civil union, with your partner, Alf. Is that right? Yep.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. Oh, I was huge. And actually, politicians like yourself and also John Key played a really big role in getting that through. I mean, Labor was in opposition then, and I think one of the most significant moments of marriage equality was actually John saying, I'm going to vote for it. And that kind of gave a license to others in the National Party who might have been a bit worried about it to do the same. And getting that cross-party support there, Morris Williamson, people like that, it made a big difference. And lots of political differences with all of the above, but on those issues, it was super important. And that role of allies, again, our mutual friend, having someone like you in his corner made a massive difference to his life. And you just never underestimate the importance of supporting people on that journey, whether they're 15 or whether they're 35.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't feel bad. I felt great but for me, there was no decision to be made. I knew exactly how I was going to vote, and I didn't have to debate it with anyone or even in my own, head. There was just no question. And it was, a couple of months after the bill had passed, and I went to old friends that had been together for 25, 30 years, and they got married, and of course I went along, and there were just literally they were older than me, and there were these men that were literally in tears and just going, we never thought we'd see this in our lifetime. Yeah. Thank you, Paula. And I was like, oh God, not that I wish I'd given it more thought, but the significance I don't think had really hit me as a straight woman until that point.
Numerous examples of that. And one of the things I think is always important to remember, like you said before, we as politicians got the privilege of being the ones that cast the votes, but the hard mahi that went on among generations of men and women to get us to that point, the people who stood up. I remember talking to Fran Wild about there was an open letter that was put in I think it was the New Zealand Herald, signed by dozens and dozens of gay men who, bear in mind it's illegal when they do this. Wow. They're putting their careers on the line to put this ad in the paper to basically say, hey, it's all of us. And so, the old cliche, we travel on the shoulders of giants to get there. And we were the lucky politicians who got to say yes and put it through. But I never ever underestimate the hard work and also the heartache that went with that for those of earlier generations.
Yeah, exactly. And then, your family had a huge shock in the early 90s with your dad being arrested for stealing money from his law firm and ending up in jail for a couple of years. I mean, it was Dunedin, for crying out loud, so everyone kind of knew anyway, and it's on the front page of the paper, right? But there are some of those people that are thinking about going into politics, and I still hear them now, and they just go, God, I just can't because of mistakes I've made or something that's happened. And I'm like, God, everyone doesn't want perfect. They just want honesty. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. I never hid it. Just like I never hid being gay. It was just who I am. And what Dad did was, horrendous for all the people that he affected, the firm he stole the money from, for those around him, and you just have to understand that that's it. As I say in the book, I love my dad very much, but he was also a very flawed man, and so you just have to understand that. And I couldn't agree more. And in fact, if we're sort of only electing colourless people who don't have a past or a history or something to draw on, then I think we'll be a lot weaker for it. And we've all got our backstories, and as you know, in your own experience and in mine, they do play out. It gets picked up and used by those who dwell in the cellars of social media. But overall, I couldn't agree more. You've just got to be upfront.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So you learned a lot about your dad while he was there because you went and visited a lot, as you say in the book, but you also learned a lot about your mum. Your parents divorced. Yeah?
Yeah, it was a full on time in the family because
Far out.
mum wasn't, mum had no idea what dad had been doing, and it was a massive betrayal for her. And so she had to deal with that. She had to deal with the fact that she had no income. There was real issues for her in terms of how she was going to, keep going forward, keep the house, etc. And then at the same time, she was also, dealing with who she was as a person. And in time, she too came out and has been able to live the life that she always wanted to live. So it was massively transformative. But gosh, my mother's courage through that is something else. Just being able to pick yourself up, like you said, Dunedin, not a huge place. Everybody
Yeah.
knew. She has to totally rebuild her life, and just her fortitude and her courage and her values that she stuck to through that period. Just when I think back about it, in fact, her and I were talking about it the other night, just recalling some of the moments, about when you don't have any money. What are you going to do? And
Yeah.
she successfully made a career for herself, and got a new relationship, and has had an amazing life. But I'm in awe still today of how she got through all of that.
And do you think it's both of their, strength of characters or, certainly the way they've raised you, but, there you are with two brothers, here's three boys that are, from all that I read, are very successful and have gone on to live big lives. And I don't think we give our parents enough of the accolades for some of that they instill in you in those early years.
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, I think the thing when you're a kid is that you don't think of your parent as a person. You don't think of them as somebody who might have faults or who might, be questioning themselves or be unsure. Your parents are your parents. And I think it is only it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? But it is only as you get older or you have your kids yourself that you appreciate that, they're doing a pretty remarkable job. And yeah, the values mattered in our household, and albeit that my father kind of breached those with his stealing. But, we were brought up to, believe we're our brother and sister's keeper, and that you should treat other people the way you want to be treated, and that you should work hard. And I think when you do look at myself and my two brothers, that we got that, and my mum's got massive curiosity about the world, and so that was all there too. But yeah, I mean, I know, I think I'm like a lot of people. The older I've got, the more grateful I am for the kind of upbringing I had.
Yeah. And those are great insights and great lessons and advice for people, I think. Okay, I love about the book is the insight into your times as a politician and some of those behind-the-scenes stories of bigger moments and challenges. And boy, did you have a few, although I don't know any time in politics that hasn't had them, but some of those are quite unexpected and bigger than what we thought. We'll take a quick break and we'll come back and have that conversation. Okay, welcome back to Ask Me Anything. My guest today, as you know, is former Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Grant Robertson. We are discussing his memoir, Anything Could Happen. Now, you say you were so pleased to leave politics, and I totally get that. But, Grant, you then, though, have gone right through your memories and that time in politics and have sat there, and it's taken you 2 years to write it?
About a year, really. Yeah, all up. Yeah.
And do you just chunk it down and write a chapter at a time sort of thing?
Yeah, I sort of have a friend. I have a friend who has a opinion about how you should write, which I quite like. Which is that rather than be all judgy about what you should put down, you should just put it all down. And that's how I did this. I just wrote and then went back over and kind of edited and so on. And yeah, the political memories, some of them are still a bit raw. Others of them, it was interesting to reflect, and I had access to quite a few of the documents and so on that I'd worked on, and I remembered things that had put out of my mind completely. And overall, it was a cathartic and good exercise, but there were certainly moments where I was like, "Yep, that's still a difficult thing to write about."
Do you think, I was thinking about it this morning, and I'm purposely using the word we. Do you think we as politicians, when we are politicians, might have a tendency at times to over exaggerate our popularity? And do you think that's because, you go to a Labour conference and you know what I mean? You see how they respond to Jacinda, you see how they responded to John Key. You are more and more surrounded by people that are nerdy and interested in politics, and then predominantly in your politics, right? And so you are getting a lot of that positive affirmation back.
I think there's a risk of that. I'm not 100% sure that we all buy into the hype, but there's definitely that risk because you are surrounded by people who, by and large, agree with you. I think it's one of the reasons why I particularly enjoyed the role of being an electorate MP.
Yeah.
Because even in Wellington Central, which was, very liberal, left-leaning electorate, I still got plenty of feedback, and that's less of the acolytes or less of the fellow travellers who are going to support you. So, yeah, I think I certainly agree to the point that you should never believe your own hype. And that is the thing about politics in New Zealand is you get a 3-yearly job interview, don't you? And if you haven't really been up to it, you either don't get re-elected or you might get a fright or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So
we've seen a few of them fall off.
Yeah, very important to make sure you're hearing different voices as you go.
Yeah. So you say in the book you never dealt well with the stress of politics as such. Did you find it a hard place to work? Do you think I think it's better than it was, but then I see moments where I just think, God, is it? On that bullying kind of culture, that hierarchy, man, in those early years, and then it's just weird.
I think if I look at it from when, I had the privilege of working for Helen Clark, and so I was in and around Parliament for the best part of 20 years. And I think it's a more stressful, more pressurised environment than when I started. I think a lot of that's to do with not just social media, but the media cycle generally, I remember talking to some journalists who said, it had changed utterly for them. They had to update the story every hour, and if it was getting lots of clicks, they had to, follow it through. And they're under pressure. We're under pressure. And I think there's a cocktail there that makes it a more toxic environment, I think, than what it was. I was going to say, we talk about it more, which is a good thing. And the work that Debbie Francis did in Parliament to look at the culture of Parliament's important. And I think that's good. I think there's more women. I think that's changed the way it works in a positive way. But I don't know. I still think it's a very, very highly pressurised environment. And you can't expect to go into politics and not face stress. My reference in the book was that basically my reaction to stress was to eat, which is not a great reaction.
Yeah, but mine was too. And I used to say to people, I just put on so much weight in Parliament, and I used to say to people, I just used to think, people used it as a reward, which I'm not blaming anyone else, you know what I mean? Like, because they knew I love food, so everyone fed me, and then second, I would think, damn it, I work so hard and I'm working such long hours. If I want a burger and fries for dinner, I'll have a burger and fries for dinner. That's all fine, but I was doing it 4 times a week. Like if you're doing it once a fortnight. Fine.
But the hours, I don't want a woe is me story about politicians. Central government politicians are well paid. But in the book, I talk about a class once asked me to kind of keep a diary for them, a school class. And when I was a minister, and it was a 70-hour week. And, you would have had many of those as well.
Yeah,
and at that point, your ability to look after yourself, look after the people around you starts to diminish pretty quickly. And I'm not 100% convinced that's the environment to make the best decisions in either when you're pumping out 70-hour weeks on a regular basis.
And really regular, and when you're not perhaps sitting behind that desk or in front of a group of people, and particularly when you were working with through COVID and all the rest of it, your brain never really stops. there's
No.
always a big gnarly problem. And I mean, man, through that COVID years, you sort of talk about just how quick, the decisions had to be made. And as we were all sitting there back watching it and living it, like you could just, like I knew the work that was going on behind, like you just knew how slowly at times that machine can work. And so just how fast it had to really was just incredible.
Yeah, it was extraordinary times because we didn't know really what we were dealing with. We had to be acting a lot on instinct. We had to, as you say, make decisions very, very quickly, and things that did used to take a month, we had to deal with in a week, and in a week we had to deal with them in a day. And the system wasn't brilliantly set up with that for that, so we had to make some changes to the way we made decisions, and we had to trust people at the coalface in the community, which I think ultimately was a good thing, but it really put a strain on the way that environment operated, and people are going to have their own views on what we did, but I remain very proud of that period because there's no playbook. You've got to go with your gut. You've got to go with what you think's right. And, it was an extraordinary time to work. I mean, it was governing sort of twice at double speed. I called it the other day, it was like juggling chainsaws on a unicycle. It was just, it was danger everywhere.
Yeah. And as you say, that manifested itself for you personally in both the stress on your mental health and on you physically as well. You certainly talk about the bad back and the pain from that as well, and then some of the weight stuff, which hands up, I'm with you on that. And then your mental, and hey, I had it. I remember when John Key said after 6 years, you're not going to be child, youth and family anymore, and I was just like, I'm not done. I just how can I be done when there's still so many children getting hurt on a daily basis? And he said to me, I'm worried about your mental health, and he was right. And I didn't know it at the time.
I can remember running into you at an airport after one of those terrible work and income incidents. And I remember, obviously we're on different sides of politics and we've had some pretty robust debates, but I knew you as a person, and I remember how upset you were about that. And I think the more I reflect on that role of being a minister, we're all just carrying the weight of it. And obviously in COVID, we were literally doing the will anyone die, equation. And that's bound to put mental pressure on you. And I think for me, I operated on massive adrenaline for several years there. And then when I did reach the latter end of that, and Jacinda decided to finish up and my back caused me problems, and I ended up with a bizarre temporary paralysis situation at one stage, and all of that just played on my mind. And I a person who I was always pretty robust mentally, I did start suffering some symptoms of anxiety, and I write about that in the book. I think I'm fortunate; it was temporary; it didn't last for me. But the level of pressure is going to play out for you mentally.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really real. I also, you sort of talking about us on our different sides, it is ironic that we were both sitting in probably the same room but at different times, negotiating with Winston Peters to try and form a government.
Yeah, I think we were literally in the same room. So yes.
Yeah, we were, at different times. And man, that was surreal, right? Like, genuinely, and not knowing. I mean, we didn't know we weren't chosen until we were watching the TV.
No, we all watched it on TV. I think that's one of the things when I tell people that they're almost incredulous. They say, surely you knew. They're like, nope. And there's a couple of pictures in the book of Jacinda and I just as we find out. And yeah, that was a 100% genuine moment for us.
You found him interesting to work with in the early days, but then you say towards, the end of that time, it was more and more challenging.
Yeah, look, I'm still proud of the things we did in that government with Labour and New Zealand First and the Greens. I think we achieved some really important things. As time wore on, it did get harder, and we struggled a bit on some particular issues, things around stuff like taxation, but also around elements of of COVID as well as towards the end. And yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I'm very conscious of the fact that Winston's still a player on the political stage, and perhaps always will be. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, no,
He's outlived you and me.
We had our differences, and I struggled towards the end of that period of time as to how to best work with him and with New Zealand First.
Is that because then he was a bit unpredictable, or or he'd sort of say one thing and then upon reflection, or you know what I mean? Because you just sort of saw that playing out. And look, I've never worked that closely with him, so I'm not making judgment.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of people who have. I mean, and this is very much my opinion, and I'm sure Winston would have a very different view of this, but I do feel he's a person who, surprisingly, perhaps for people, I think he struggles to make decisions. I think he finds it hard sometimes to be able, and therefore that plays out with things taking longer, and occasionally my perspective being that a position was taken and then it was changed. And and that after a while that can become quite exhausting to deal with. But look, we made it through the 3 years. We governed all the way through. He was part of that government. Obviously, they were voted out. He's on First in 2020, and then he came back in 23 to support a different government. So, we still did it. We still got through. But yeah, it had its frustrations, and it was definitely quite tiring by the end.
I mean, earlier in the book, and you do mention it with Winston, but one thing I really, really agreed with, which was, a good minister makes decisions, because the level of paperwork and the level of information that's coming at you, you can just churn through it, and, paralysis by fear gets no one anywhere, and you won't always get it 100% right either, as we all know. But man, I could see the difference with ministers that are making decisions and driving their portfolios, and those that just
absolutely. And that advice came from the amazing Dame Annette King, who said to us as incoming Labour ministers in 2017, your job is to make decisions. There's a heap of people in the system who'll give you advice or tell you not to do things, but ultimately someone has to keep making the decisions. And I remember Barack Obama when he came out to New Zealand, and he talked about the fact that after a year or so he turned to his chief of staff when he was president of the United States and said, why are all the decisions I have to make so difficult? And the person said, because if it was easy, it would have already been dealt with before it got anywhere near you. And from our perspective as ministers, I really did observe some people who found it difficult to make decisions, and and also having a good idea of what you want to do going in. I remember talking to Simon Power about this, and if you spend your time in opposition just playing the political game, which you have to do a bit of course, but you should spend an equal amount of time saying, okay, if I do get the privilege of being a minister, here are the things that are my priorities. And the ministers who can combine that with the ability to make decisions are the ones who are going to succeed, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, I try and stay away from current day politics, and, I'm chairing Farm so I'm trying to do a neutral job and that sort of stuff. But, I just will often, if someone asks me, I won't name people, but I'll just go, you can tell the ministers that put the work in their opposition years and came in with a plan and are now administering it. Whether you agree with it or not, at least they've got a plan and they are getting on and doing it, and they've given it the pre-thought. I, of course, didn't have that luxury because I became minister a bit surprisingly. But, hey, I'm not complaining. Hey, let's talk about Jacinda. And I think particularly and you tell me if you think I'm wrong, because it's an opinion. I think that the one thing that she had in common with John Key is that they both like to be liked. I mean, John liked to be liked.
I'm not sure there's many politicians who don't.
No, I don't care.
You didn't care?
No.
Did you say?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think Jacinda wasn't afraid to take hard decisions. And, but I personally believe the majority of politicians want to be liked, because I think most human beings want to be liked. you put your hard hat on though, don't you? And you make the calls that you need to make. I was going to reflect that if you're asking me what I thought was similar about John and Key and Jacinda Ardern, I think they both had an ability to capture where New Zealand was at a particular moment. That's one of my reflections. I think I might say this in the book, that I think we politically underestimated John enormously. We thought, oh, here's this guy come back from being a merchant banker somewhere overseas. What is he going to be able to do? How's he going to know how New Zealanders are feeling? And of course, the reality was that at that moment, he captured it really well. And I think Jacinda in 2017 and through COVID, the first part of COVID particularly, was able just to capture how people felt. So, yeah, we're all different personalities, and she's obviously a good friend of mine, so I don't have a massive perspective on being able to say what people might think of her. What I know is that she's a person who, cares really deeply and makes her decisions on principle, and certainly made some tough ones along the way.
But then I think we underestimated her. Well, I did.
Yes, and I would argue
I'll be
exactly
honest.
that.
Yeah.
I'd argue that you guys did as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly, and mind you, some of it was that she so emphatically said she didn't want to become a leader, So you were so you could sort of see it like that, and we're not friends or anything, and so I don't want to over exaggerate it, but we'd spend a lot of time in green rooms waiting to go on for breakfast TVs and things like that, and I knew that having a family was really, really important to her. I mean, I was a bit like you. I just was like, oh my goodness, how on earth are you going to do this? But I was just absolutely chuffed for her, actually I can feel myself getting a bit emotional because I just, you know what I mean? It was just like that massive dream coming true, and the way you all rallied around her, I just really have admired it, and what you've shown to the public and to women and dads and what we can do. So cool.
Yeah, and look, it was, it's fantastic for Clark and Jacinda that they were able to have Neve, and that she's an amazing kid, and they're doing a great job, and they always were going to do a great job. Politics was a big issue in the middle of that, but that was an interesting time too. Obviously Winston became the Prime Minister during that period of time too, and actually I kind of look back at that and think that actually went relatively smoothly at that point early on in our term. So, different times, different experiences.
Look, we touched on it, but let's just talk a little bit more about it. I mean, that when you felt that shift, when you felt the public turning, and you talk about, some experiences in restaurants, and I'm sure that we can all give them, but there was that kind of, and that people fed up, and then sometimes they have to blame, and it's the people whose faces they know and have been seeing the most of, and as you say, make decisions in the tough times as well. But I mean, you actually talk of being scared during that time, that people would confront you, that you would have to get picked up from home because you didn't feel safe kind of walking to Parliament.
Yeah, the latter part of the COVID period did that, we tipped over a line there. I think, as you say, we're public figures, people are going to come up and say things to us, sure, but as we hit the latter end of COVID and the occupation of Parliament, there were threats, and they were real. And we were, trying to manage ourselves. And I cover a couple of those incidents in the book, and they were scary. And, you sort of, and it's particularly the point at which your family gets drawn in, that it goes outside of the political environment. And we were there at work in the beehive. We could see nooses in the trees. It was frightening. And I know it's a controversial area, and there are people who feel very, very differently about that time, but I can tell you from our perspective, there were days when it was pretty scary. And, we kept going. We kept going because we knew it was important that we kept what we were doing. But, there were definitely some times there where I was really questioning, what it was all about. And I went to a few friends and said, what do you think? And they said, look, it'll blow over, and then, you'll be able to get through it. And ultimately it did, but didn't make it any less scary.
No, it took its toll, eh? It's quite interesting when, Jacinda announced she was stepping down. A lot of people were, genuinely surprised that you weren't stepping up. I wasn't, because I've been there, right? And I knew the toll that it takes. But explain to people, like, because for most people, they do want to get to the top, like Prime Minister is a pretty cool job, but you made the decision not to run for it, not to put yourself forward.
Yeah, two or three things were in my mind. The first was the one you've pointed out, that I'd been very adjacent to the Prime Minister as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, and I knew I was busy. I was in a full-on place in those roles. I knew the step up to being PM, and I just knew it wasn't in me anymore, and I thought it would be disingenuous to try and put myself in there when I knew I didn't have everything that I observed that it took. Secondly, I'd kind of given that away several years earlier, and I was really happy with the idea of being finance minister and supporting Jacinda, and I'd moved on past it. And I know that sounds a bit weird for people, but it just wasn't in my thinking. And yeah, I could have changed tack and gone down that path, but you've got to be prepared to give it the full 110. And I just, it wasn't there at that point, and I knew it wouldn't go well for the party, for New Zealand, for me, and there were other things I could do. And yeah, I just think, I remember somebody I knew said to me, "Oh God, you gave up the experience of being Prime Minister." I remember saying, it's not about experiences. It's not like bungee jumping.
Yeah.
Like it's a big thing to take on. It matters a lot. And my desire to have that experience relevant.
You have a huge and very successful career, as a politician, and I'm just wrapped that you've got out fully intact, and that you're now living. Okay, finally for this segment, podcast is called Ask Me Anything, and so far I've done all the asking, so this is when you get to ask me a question.
Fantastic. You know how they always ask, you do that thing, what would you say to your younger self? I want to know what Paula Bennett, who I met 30 years ago as a member of the Massey University Student Association Albany Executive, what's the one thing she wants to say to Paula Bennett of 2025?
Go harder, faster. When you've got those self-doubts, just kick them immediately to the curb. Don't take bloody weeks and sometimes months to do it. I've never felt like I wasn't myself, so that's all right. I honestly haven't been too consumed with what other people think about me, but I think it's that the time just goes so quickly, and so you may as well jump in 2 feet. You may as well just give it everything that you've possibly got, and the kind of you talk about in the book, and I think you're absolutely right. I don't think there's a human being in the world. I was thinking when I was thinking about talking to you this morning, I was thinking, if you've had no self-doubt or imposter syndrome in your life, then it's been a frickin' boring life. You've never pushed yourself, know?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think of the person I met 30 years ago is pretty much the person I'm talking to on the screen right now. But I also know that we were, we had big ideas about the world, and some of the edges of that gets knocked off as you go. And it's quite interesting. I'm sort of observing this where few people I know have kind of a little bit older than us have now reached the point of almost going in a circle and kind of being back where they were in their 20s going, you know what, I really do want to push the boat out a bit further. And I think there's a period of time in your sort of 30s and 40s and early 50s maybe where you feel a bit more obliged to do things in a particular way. And we had a lot of fun back then, but we're not going to talk about that on today's podcast.
Another one, maybe, another time. Hey, this has been fantastic, and I'm being told to wind it up, so I'll try and do what I'm told. Grant, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for the book. Thank you for sharing your story. All the best in the Dunedin winter.
It's beautiful down here.
Great. Grant's memoir, Anything Could Happen, is out now, and that's it for another episode of Ask Me Anything. If you have enjoyed this episode, please follow Ask Me Anything on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts. It's great to be back for Season 8. I'm Paula Bennett. Ask Me Anything. Goodbye.